mostly been, doing some work on it. So, but hopefully we'll do some sailing next week. So
Great.
yeah. All right, I think we're at the top of the hour. So welcome everyone. This is the May 19th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting for the City of Trinidad. Before we start, I do want to thank Commissioner Johnson for running the last meeting, April 21st, while I was out. So thanks very much, Richard, for that. And I guess we should start with our usual, a roll call to see if we have our quorum.
Commissioner Kelly,
I am here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Stockness,
Here.
Commissioner Heikkinen,
Here.
and Commissioner Hopkins.
Here.
Excellent. We have a full complement of commissioners. So we'll go ahead and start our first item of business, which is reviewing the minutes from the meetings, the April 8th and the April 21st meeting. So I'll start with commissioner questions and comments, and then we'll open for public comment on the minutes after that. So I have reviewed these and I did not see any problem with the April 8th. And as for April 21st, I was not in attendance, as I mentioned. So I'll bow out of that part of the discussion. Any other comments or questions on the minutes?
Yeah, I have
Diane,
a comment.
please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner Stockness,
Okay.
Go ahead.
So on page 2 of 6, issues of local significance, parking congestion are more widespread and associated with most holidays and the entire summer tourism season. There was a general consensus to keep this section general as information can and will go out of date. It's not going to go out of date. This is the New York Times. Okay, this is May 8th. The New York Times, the Trinidad Pier is in the article. So I think Richard saw it. So I just don't agree that it's going to go out of date. So I just wanted to put that out there because I've been here, 45 years, 46 now, and tourism is the city. And then page 4 of 6, when we were talking about solid waste reduction and recycling, and then we were talking about burn piles. And Johnson wanted to review what other small rural communities do. And I'm in Willow Creek and I'm in Trinidad in the winter, and there is smoke. So it does settle in the winter months. So we might want to put that in parentheses, that the smoke does settle in the winter months. I mean, View Avenue has probably, and the Ocean Avenue has probably 3 or 4 every winter that, and then my neighbor comes all the way over my house. One of the places that's getting to be a new STR. Okay, that's my comment. For the 8th, I have some on the 21st too.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment on your concern on that.
Okay.
So I think the discussion on the issues of local significance, I think we could probably agree that we could maybe take out some of the information will go out of date, but I think the broader discussion was about keeping the general plan general.
Okay.
And then going into more detail in ordinances, right, where the ordinances can be enforced. And so putting the detail in those makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
But in the general plan, just keeping it more general. So I think that was what was intended there.
All right.
So so maybe we just say general consensus to keep this section general, and then you know, are you comfortable with leaving as some information can go out of date?
Right, some,
Or- Yeah,
yeah.
okay. All right, so we can just put the word some in.
Because I've seen a big change. I mean, my kids went to school and there were 375 kids and now there are 120.
Yeah, there's been a lot of publicity, and I expect tourism, and especially with people coming out of COVID, I think we can all agree that there's going to be a lot of people coming to Trinidad. So, yeah, I think we're all in agreement on that. Other comments on the April 8th
Okay,
minutes? Or
so,
I think Aaron had a comment. Was that on the April 8th minutes, Aaron? Okay,
Yeah,
Diane,
it is,
did,
Cheryl.
okay, sorry, one sec. So
No,
Diane, did you want to continue with April 8th or shall we?
no, I want to
Okay.
stay on the 8th and then we'll go to the next one. I
And then
want
we'll
to
go to
hear
the 21st. Okay, great.
Aaron's, you know, what he's saying.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt you. Commissioner Heikkinen, comments on April 8th.
Mine was just relative to on page 3 of 6, item number 3. Just clarifying, my agreement is that there is an issue with truck traffic. I'm not necessarily in agreement that signs and that kind of stuff is the way forward, but I just think it's something that we need to manage. Just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, do you want to change the verbiage in here on that section?
Yeah, maybe just something to the effect of agreed that there is an issue with truck traffic in town that needs to be managed.
Okay,
Because that I absolutely agree with the methodology. I'm not sure, like I said, signage is going to be necessarily the best path forward because
I see.
for obvious reasons, I don't, necessarily solve the problem.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Hopkins, I believe you had a comment?
It seems fine, but I just thought I'd clarify that on page 3 of 6 and in energy, the Marine Lab down there, they don't have a hydrogen fueling station anymore. It's been taken out when they put in their underground saltwater tanks. So just thought I'd share that with everybody. But they might have it somewhere, but not in Trinidad.
Oh, okay. Thanks for the update on that. So maybe we can just say, suggested the city learn from HSU Marines Lab hydrogen fueling station, then in parentheses, has been relocated. However, has been relocated.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Johnson, any comments on April 8th?
Oh, just an additional info share on page 1 of 6. The paragraph that talks about the climate action plan. I thought it was interesting that today in the Times Standard, based on the information that was provided to the Board of Supervisors yesterday, the climate action plan is still several months away from a public draft review. So it was intended to be May, but we don't have to change anything. Like I said, just an info share. It's going to be off a couple of months.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on then, and we'll come back. We'll open to public comments after we finish both of these. So April 21st, any comments or questions on that?
Well, Parker did a good job explaining the ADUs and the junior ADUs, which then segues into our topic tonight. Let's see. Yeah, that's a big, and then the other thing was and let's see. So I just thought, Trevor, we should put the list of the ADUs that we already have on the current housing crisis list. Because we have to have 15, right? Trevor?
Can we, you guys, can we hold on that discussion for the
Okay.
ADU topic? Will that
Okay.
be okay, Commissioner Hawk?
Yeah,
Stockman?
I just wanted to, I think she mentioned it somewhere and I just thought we need to put those on because that's 8 out of 15 already.
I think that's,
Yeah.
yeah, great suggestion. And we'll discuss that as part of the agenda item this
All
evening,
right.
hopefully. Commissioner Johnson, you had questions or comments on these, on the minutes?
One correction that I think is important, that's on page 405. second paragraph from the bottom, the third line there, it says that it's likely that the city would abandon the line because it is part of an important look. I think the word there we were looking for is loop. So I think that's significant enough that we should make that change.
All right, thank you. Are there questions or comments or corrections on these? All right, thank you very much. With that, I'm going to open to public comments. Please raise your hand if you have any comments or questions specific to these two minutes from April 8th and April 21st.
No comments.
I see no comments. Okay, great. I'm going to bring it back to you, commissioners. Is there a motion, first on April 8th, is there a motion to approve the minutes with the suggested changes? And just to recap, those changes were, first of all, page 2 of 6, changing issues of local significance to include as some information can and will go out of date. And on page 3 of 6, section 3, Commissioner Heikkinen agreed that truck traffic needs to be managed. And then on at the bottom of page 3, under energy, the suggestion that the hydrogen fueling station be learned from is now in parentheses, however, has been relocated.
Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, with the amendments, and then all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let the record reflect that the minutes of April 8th have been approved with those amendments. And then April 21st, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve as amended.
And I'll second. Okay. And
Okay.
Commissioner Hopkins. All those in favor? Aye.
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 All right. And those have been also approved with amendments. All right, so that brings us to approval of tonight's agenda. Commissioners, I'm going to open it up to you for any suggested changes to tonight's agenda. All right, I see, oh, sorry, Commissioner Stockton.
Yeah. I'd like to do the STR item first before the ADUs. I think the STR we can get through quicker than the ADUs.
Okay. Commissioners, any other feedback on that? And then I may ask for, see if there are any members of the public that are specifically here for that agenda item. All right, I don't have a problem personally with switching it. Let me just briefly open to public comments. Is there anyone here who intentionally came to the meeting hoping to discuss the ADU first? Okay, I see no comments or concerns about that. So if everyone agrees, we'll just flip the agenda and do this in a different order. Is that okay? All right, I see heads nodding. So we're good to go. So with that, before we do that, let me just go to items from the floor before I forget. So this is the part of the agenda in tonight's meeting where we invite members of the community to speak on things that are not on tonight's agenda. We'll give folks up to 3 minutes, and pursuant to the Brown Act of the state of California, please note that the commission will not respond to said items in any length. We may answer if you make brief comments or questions, these items that are not on the agenda, but for the most part, it's just an opportunity for members of the community to speak. So with that, would anyone like to speak about things not on the agenda? All right, Commissioner Johnson.
Yes, I'll just make a real quick comment as a private citizen. My name is Richard Johnson. I live on Baker Ranch Road, south of Trinidad. There's been a little bit of discussion in the last several weeks regarding the issue whether or not the city should expand itself. I just wanted to say, while the city manager is here, that I think this really warrants a very in-depth conversation at this point. I think when we look at where we are as a city and where we are as a community and the challenges that we have ahead of us in terms of so many issues such as energy, water conservation, and population, that I think that at some point in the future, in the near future, I would certainly very strongly recommend a detailed discussion at the city council level on where we might be going with expanding the city and all that means, and give the public an opportunity to weigh in, as I know that it's somewhat of a controversial issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Citizen Johnson. Yes, Ms. Levine.
Are you referring to the possibility of expanding into the what do they call it?
The service area?
Yeah, the water service area, the field of, I forget what the usual name of it is.
Sphere of influence, I think.
The influence, what is it called again?
Sphere of influence.
The sphere of influence, thank you. You are referring to expanding into the sphere of influence. I think there's going to be problems with that. I think one of the reasons to do it is possibly the access of water from the sphere of influence. And as it says in the engineering reports, tapping into those creeks will be as susceptible to drought as Luffenholz. And there's people that are dependent on that water to supplement their wells, or completely dependent on it. And I think it would do a disservice to the people in the sphere of influence.
All right, thank you so much for your comments, Ms. Levine. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And Commissioner Heikkinen, or Citizen Heikkinen in this case?
This is Commissioner. I just wanted to state the obvious. I am obviously at work today. Hopefully people picked up on that. So if I do need to step away, I'll be back as quickly as I can.
All right, we understand. And sorry, I thought maybe you were going to make a public comment. So I was just helping everyone distinguish between commissioners versus when we're putting on our other residential hat. So, all right, other comments, public comments. Okay, with that then I'm going to go ahead and move on to tonight's. I'm going to close public comments and move on to tonight's agenda. So we have 2 agenda items tonight, as I mentioned. So the first one was to be the ADU ordinance, but we're going to go ahead and move on and begin with the STR ordinance review. So this will be the initial review and discussion of the city's STR ordinance, which is 2016-03. And I think it would be good to start out with a staff report, and then I'll also probably ask Commissioner Stockness to weigh in as the chair of the STR committee. And so maybe we can get, Trevor, get your perspective and kind of the background, and then Diane, if you don't mind kind of getting us up to date on how we should be thinking about this from the committee's perspective, that would be terrific. All right, so Trevor, you're up first, I guess, here.
Great, thank you. So, I think it was pretty clear from the last council meeting that they want the Planning Commission to expedite the review of the ordinance, which is required in the ordinance itself, that it be reviewed after 2 years. And so you know, the city did form the STR committee, which one of its purposes was to review the ordinance, and they haven't made substantial recommendations to the ordinance. And staff hasn't, you know, from a staff perspective, the ordinance has been working well. You know, there have been statements that the reason the city doesn't get complaints is because people no longer complain because the city doesn't respond. But you know, the city has responded to complaints. So, you know, I'm not sure what the level of, you know, what the issues still are. I know there are, you know, there are certain neighborhoods that are more impacted than others. Obviously, Ocean Avenue, for example, is one that's been impacted. So, but anyway, I did want to just give you a little bit of history. You know, this is something that we're not going to, you know, decide in just 1 or 2 meetings. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background to, since some of you were not involved in that process, just to give an overview of how much work went into the existing ordinance and, you know, all the public input. I think I've got my, this is my notebook on the current ordinance, the development of the current ordinance. So, you know, it's, and I don't want to spend too much, because we do have a lot of other priorities that we've talked about this year. And so I don't want to spend, you know, unnecessary time kind of just going over some of the same issues. Certainly, you know, we'll address what comes up and the ideas that come up and the questions that come up. But so that, you know, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background into how much work went into it. And, you know, there's a lot of questions and issues that come up with vacation rentals, you know, around affordability and community housing affordability, community character, things like that. And, you know, we did look at those issues, and, you know, they really, you know, some time has passed. We could look and see if there's additional information, but most of those kind of concerns didn't really pan out with the data and from both the city and in other places. For example, if you look at the census data between 1980 and 2000, before the city had vacation rentals, they were really a thing. During those 2 decades, the population decreased, you know, housing prices went way up, vacancy rates went up, population went down, age of people went up. And, you know, Trinidad had a lot of vacant second homes then, you know, that weren't being used as commercial vacation rentals. They were, you know, people's vacation homes. And then between 2000 and 2010, when, you know, vacation rentals really became a thing, the numbers were the opposite. The population went up, the age went down. You know, so so some of the issues that people worry about aren't necessarily issues. It's not to say that, you know, they shouldn't be regulated or limited, but I do think, again, I wouldn't be at this point real in favor of wholesale changes to the ordinance. You know, for one, that would take a lot of our time. It would, you know, the Coastal Commission has always been real supportive of vacation rentals. And so to limit them more would require the city, you know, putting together data to show that it's necessary. So I just want to provide that little bit of caveat as we go through this. So, and then I also gave you, you know, the city council has also been discussing a moratorium on new vacation rental licenses. So it was kind of clear that they want the planning commission to look at and consider the caps. So we have, in the current ordinance, there's a cap in the UR zone, urban residential zone, and there is a cap in the SR zone. So the 2 residential zones have caps. And the idea was that, you know, that would sort of move STRs into the PD zone in particular, where commercial uses are allowed, and sort of get them out of the residential zones. And so for the most part, that's worked. We are now this year for the first time under the cap in the UR zone. And there is a wait list for licenses in the UR zone. We are also under the cap in the SR zone, but there is, as of right now, no wait list. There have been a couple of inquiries about additional STRs in the PD zone. So those could come forward as well. So, you know, there might be worth considering things, you know, whether the UR cap is appropriate, whether it needs to be lowered. The city has never held a lottery because we've never had space under the cap before. Or in the PD zone, you know, maybe a citywide cap maybe should be considered, or, you know, allowing a certain number in the PD zone. And then beyond that, you can have more, but with a use permit or something like that. Right now, all uses in the PD zone require a use permit anyway, so that would kind of make sense. Let's see, you know, and obviously the STRs do provide a you know, certain amount of revenue for the city. And they also provide for overnight visitor accommodations, which is important. It's a priority use under the Coastal Act. And since our RV parks are not currently, you know, they're mostly long-term tenants at this point, they're not providing visitor services. So STRs are really our visitor services in town. The ordinance does provide for a couple of different types of STRs. So there's the full-time STRs, and then there are resident, let's see, there's resident STRs, which is you're a resident most of the year and you can rent out your house up to, I think, 3 months a year or something, 2 or 3 months a year. And then there's also home share STRs, which is where you are living there and you're just renting out a room. And I do believe we don't have any of those, either of those licenses in the city right now, but I do believe there's a couple of STRs that have full licenses, but they operate more like a home share, although I'm not 100% sure about that. But anyway, so I just wanted to provide, like I said, a little bit of background introduction, and then, you know, try and answer any questions you might have. And then, you know, things I can't answer tonight, I'll write down the questions, issues that you bring up, so that we can talk more about it at the next meeting, and then sort of come up with a plan for reviewing the ordinance. You know, maybe it's section by section. As Cheryl mentioned, the STR committee is going to meet in June. I think it would be like the 22nd, so after our June meeting. And their intent is to make some recommendations on the ordinance. So I think we maybe should wait for that to happen until we start really going through the ordinance. I did provide you with the committee reports that came out in 2019 and 2020 so that you can see those. Most of the recommendations in the 2020 report can actually be implemented administratively. And then I also provided you a current copy of the ordinance, as well as a map of the current STRs. So that is my staff report.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Stockton, did you want to
Start.
add some things?
I do. So Trevor, I like the map. The other thing that might go along with the map is include a list of the STRs and the property managers or the contacts, or maybe we can't do that. You can only do that for the neighbors. I don't know what, you know, so after this
Oh, no,
map,
that's public, and we're actually I'm working with Angela to get that map updated and get the list out, because the licenses are being issued. So,
Okay, well, we got a list. We got all the residents, and my neighbor called me, he got the list, with the property managers.
Okay.
Aaron probably got one. But did you get one, Richard? Did you get a list?
Remember, I don't live within the city limits, so I don't have, there's no reason for me to have a list.
Well, except you're a member of the planning commission.
Well, I think it's a matter of public record, and I think isn't it on the website somewhere, Trevor?
I don't know if this year's is up there yet,
Okay.
but yes, they
so-
normally are.
But
up there.
but we could request that it be added to the next, to the packet in the next STR discussion, since it is public, and then Richard can see it too.
Okay,
There's no reason not to. I found it kind of useful to refer to. I got it in the mail and I found it kind of useful to refer to.
yeah,
tell
so
you the
when we
truth,
hear
just
the
to kinda-
fireworks or the neighbors, I mean, I only have 3 STRs in my backyard now. Before I had 5 bordering my property. Okay, so my concern is the PD zones. I want a cap on the PD zones. The reason is, over there at the eatery, we've got a STR above the eatery. We've got the place next door, which is 4 units. So really, that's 4 STRs if you're talking about people coming and cars coming, okay?
The only one is a STR.
And those 4, the other ones are just apartments? Oh, okay. So it's just the one above the eatery, and then one of the 4 units is an STR.
Yeah, and the eatery is actually zoned commercial.
Okay. So my issue with the STR ordinance or the caps is we need to maybe put a cap on the PDs, because we basically don't want to go back to 43 units, which we started with in the early 2000s. And I think 19 is enough, 6 and the SR, but the commercial PD zone could take over. They could get a lot, and it's a way to make money. But I know, speaking of as a neighbor and as a commissioner, I think we need a cap. But I was concerned about that one property. And then the STR committee, I'm going to bring this up now. The STR committee wants a definition for meet and greet to be put into the ordinance. And the reason is we want the property managers to meet the visitors so that they know who's there, who's coming, how many cars, are there animals, all that. Because when I started on the committee, online, and they would, the people would reserve, check it off, pay, and then they wouldn't see them. And I thought, that is not going to fly here. And I voted against it, and the city council supported me. I wasn't at the meeting, but they said, okay, the property manager needs to meet the guests. So anyway, we batted that around at least for a year in the STR committee, and Dick Bruce pretty much came up with a definition, which is on page, it's the page before the map in the packet. And it
Yeah,
says
so-
meet and greet means an in-person on-site meeting at the STR between the property manager and the responsible person on the day of arrival, or no later than 12 noon on the morning after a late night arrival. They didn't want to do it in person because the people come at different times, and most of the committee said no, they need to be there by 9. So they decided 12 was a better time to meet. Okay, and so when they meet, at which time the parties will sign date and time, stamp the good neighbor contract to indicate it has been reviewed and the responsible person has not misrepresented their group during the reservation process, because they could, misrepresent the group if everything was done online. And then they added, if county and health safety guidelines recommend remote check-in, the in-person check-in will be suspended for the duration of the county health and safety recommendation. And they put that in during the COVID, during the pandemic. Okay, and then there was going to be the second part was a $200 fine if the property manager and the visitors didn't sign the meet and greet. Okay, so I think that's it for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stockness. So yeah, I was looking through the committee recommendations, and that was the one that I highlighted that appeared to be something that was requested as a change to the actual ordinance. And then on January 9th in the committee report, there were 2 recommendations, one which I believe has already been done, the draft of the cost recovery timesheet, the cost tracking timesheet and the permit application fee structure language were included. The second item, the best practices workshop, was rejected by the city council. So, my understanding is yes, okay. And then the COVID related recommendations were May 19th, 2020, but those were COVID related. And so those are not an ordinance change. So really the one that Diane mentioned is really the only one that I saw in the committee recommendation. I do want to ask either Eli or Trevor. I am noting in here that the city council has asked the planning commission to review the ordinance, as they should, since it's time. My question is, was there some specific direction from the city council in terms of what they'd like the planning commission to focus on? And my understanding from the staff report is that one of the areas of focus, besides the committee recommendation that Diane just mentioned, was caps. So is that actually the case? Has the city council asked the planning commission to specifically look at this ordinance with the idea that caps could remain the same, could change, just basically review and evaluate? Is that correct, or is that not the guidance, or do we know?
I mean, the motion was to expedite the review. So they didn't give specific direction about looking at a cap, but because they voted for a moratorium, although it didn't pass because they didn't have the 4/5, I'm sure they'll talk about it at the next meeting. But because they're voting to put a moratorium on until we review, that means they don't want to issue more licenses and risk, increasing the number if we're gonna put additional caps. So that was just my,
I see.
Assumption based on their actions.
Okay, and Eli, I believe you were going to comment.
Yeah, so the main direction from the council is that the STR ordinance is supposed to have been reviewed 2 years after it was adopted. It's been well over 2 years, probably over 4 years. And therefore, they just felt that it's time to review the ordinance and then make the recommendations. And part of the reason for the moratorium that was discussed was really to sort of stop the activity until the new ordinance comes through as to if there are any changes and so on. At least that was the intent. So, but the bottom line is that the council just felt that it was time that the planning commission addressed it and that the STR ordinance be reviewed and then presented back to the council and eventually to the coastal commission.
Okay, thank you very much. So I understand then that the direction is to review as per usual, since it's past due, and no specific areas of concern, but it's up to the planning commission to look at and examine this document, this ordinance. Okay. All right, I just like to get kind of a context setting there. Thank you. All right, I have a few comments and questions, but I'm going to hold mine. So Commissioner Johnson, Hopkins, or Heikkinen, any comments or questions?
Well, I'll start.
Please.
First of all, a couple of comments. I've been looking back through some of the minutes from the STR committee, and I really want to thank the STR committee. It looks like they put a great deal of effort into lots of dialogue. I'll put it that way. I know this is very controversial, but looking at the minutes, you can see that people are really trying to work really hard on this. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Diane, two questions for you real fast. What's the current membership of the STR committee? And I think I know who it is, but are we still down one member?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
that's
I tried to get another member inside the city limit, because two of the members are STR owners, of the committee. And then Dick Bruce and myself are, the local residents in town. And then I'm the planning commissioner representative, but we do still need one more.
Okay. And then just one additional item for you, Diane, is to clarify what you were referring to. You were talking about a cap for the PD zone. Are you suggesting an overall cap to include the PD zone, or are you saying that there needs to be a specific cap for the PD zone in addition to the other two zones?
Yes, I am suggesting a specific cap for the PD zone, because in the ordinance, there's no limits.
I understand.
It's just the UR and the SR. So I think we're at a point with our tourist industry to let the rest of the city know that there is a cap. And we need to look at that as a city.
I understand. I just wanted to clarify and make the distinction between the two. And I would assume, maybe I shouldn't, but I'm assuming that at the next meeting of the STR committee, that there will be hopefully a fairly specific list of recommendations that they would like to bring forward to the planning commission and then on to the city council. Is that correct?
Right. I suggested at our March meeting that they read the STR ordinance and look through it and put down some comments and, some ideas or things, concerns, and then I'll bring it back to you and then we'll take it back to the city council. And my comment will be on the PD zone.
Okay.
And I know Eli probably has some suggestions, that he can get on that also.
You cut out there for a second,
Oh,
Diane. You were saying
Well-
something about that Eli had something to add. Is that
well, I
correct?
think, he has some knowledge that, he might have on the PD zones that we could all have as planning commissioners and as the STR, with what he does on a daily basis to let us know, plus Trevor, how do we cap that, or do we cap that? I just don't want it to get out of control and then, we go back to what Richard and I did and Trevor writing this ordinance, and we had hundreds of comments and, probably 100 hours of our own time on this ordinance, plus 30 meetings. Okay.
If I could comment also, as far as the caps, I think once we get into that area, I could talk about it and make a recommendation.
Okay.
But specifically regarding the STR committee, so it is supposed to be the one planning commissioner, who is Diane, and two public members from the city, and then two business owners, meaning either property managers or STR owners. So we are lacking the one other public member from the city. And as a result, Dick Bruce as chair felt that, maybe the STR committee shouldn't really delve into it until it has the other public member. In addition to that, the STR committee at least has felt that the recommendations they've made are basically on an, reviewing how everything's working during the past few years and making recommendations to help improve the process. And I think that they feel that that's their primary role, rather than to actually do a thorough review of the STR ordinance. However, if they had the full membership of all 5 members, then I would say, definitely that they should, at least weigh in by going what I call section by section. Just say, okay, if, based upon our prior review and based upon what we have heard in the community and how the STRs are working, we feel that this section is fine. We'll move on to the next section, or this section needs to be tweaked, and then we'll suggest whatever it is, which is the same thing that I'm thinking the Planning Commission can be doing when they go through the ordinances, go through it section by section and, weigh in on whatever the STR committee has already addressed in their normal business. And then whatever else that maybe, like Diane's making some suggestions, I can make some suggestions and so on, and then weigh all of those, and then change the sections that, may need to be improved, and keep the other sections as is if they're fine. And as a result, what Trevor was showing, all of those multiple pages in the formation of the STR ordinance, I don't think we need to get into quite that detail because of the fact that we do have a working ordinance, and we're just basically going to be looking at it, okay, from here forward, what should we be doing? And then the ordinance, the way it's written, is that it was supposed to have the initial 2-year review. And after that, it's as needed, meaning that once you do this review, if you feel like a review is necessary in 6 months, you can do it. And if you feel it's not necessary for 6 years, you could do it then. So just as needed from there on.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for the clarification. Commissioner Johnson, were you done with your
Yeah.
questions and comments?
Just a few more real quickly, thanks.
Okay,
So I won't get into a lot of detail, but I think that based on where we are right now, it's clear what we have to do. And I would recommend that we put together at least a commitment to a timeline that says by such and such a period of time this year that we will have completed our review. Because as Trevor pointed out, there's a lot of things that we have on our plate this year, and it would be very useful to at least have a commitment to say that by sometime in the summer or whenever that we have completed our review and we can pass our recommendations on to the city council. Having said that, just a couple of other real quick comments, mostly on the staff, on the annual reports from the STR Advisory Committee. I'm looking at, well, they don't have page numbers, but it's in the December 15th report under the recommendations on the meet and greet. By the way, I think that's an excellent definition of a meet and greet. I think that's right on. The second item, though, the recommending the language to add a $200 fine. It's been my experience in the past, and I'll certainly wait until the legal counsel review is complete, but it always seems to me that we get into trouble if we try to put a specific amount of dollars, if you will, in an ordinance. And the way we've handled that in the past is that we've always said that if there is to be a fine, that the amount of the fine will be agreed to by resolution of the city council. That way you don't have to worry about going back in and changing the ordinance every 3 or 4 years because you want to change the amount of the fine. The other thing is, I'll just make a couple of comments real fast on the map. And my first comment is to you, Trevor. Currently the STR ordinance has a limitation on adjacent properties not being able to be STRs. And when you look at the map, it's pretty obvious that there are multiple locations where there are adjacent properties that are STRs. I know that there is an exception process in place, and just real quickly, from your perspective, are all of these adjacent property issues allowable by the exception waiver, by the exception process?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so the only exception was allowed in the original ordinance, and that was for parking spaces for existing STRs. So a number of STRs were granted these parking exceptions under the first ordinance. Under this ordinance, no exceptions are allowed, but everything that was existing was grandfathered in.
Okay.
So if you already had a parking exception, you can continue to use it. If you were already adjacent to someone else in the UR zone, you can continue on with your license. If you were, there's restrictions on, one owner having multiple STRs. Again, that was grandfathered in. And so the idea was that by attrition through property sales and whatever, those would eventually go away, and any new STRs would have to meet those regulations, those standards.
Okay, that clarifies that. I was getting a little confused there. Let's see. The other thing is, I think it would be really useful if on this map that we could color in the various zones. That way we would know real quickly what, where the STRs are relative to each zone. I think that would be a real help. And then just one last comment, just real quickly, I was comparing, I know I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but I was comparing this map for STRs with the map that's in the ADU package. But that ADU map also shows VDUs. And I just noticed real quickly that one VDU, which is item, well, it's not listed, but I think it's up off of Berry Road, that's listed as a VDU on the ADU map. Is not shown as an STR on the STR map. I don't know whether that's me or what, but that was one inconsistency. So when I saw that, I thought maybe we ought to maybe just make sure that it is consistent across both maps. I think those are my comments for right now.
And just to clarify, I don't know if that. So if you see on the bottom, that map is from 2016. So this map was
Okay.
When we were writing this ordinance, and we were looking at, one of the things we were looking at is parcel size and what was then VDUs, now they're STRs. And there is a provision that if your lot is over 10,000 square feet, you can have an extra 2 guests. So there's another map like this with lots over 10,000 square feet. But for ADUs, I gave you the 8,000 square foot map. So this is an old map.
I should have realized when it said VDUs that I was looking at something old. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Okay.
Commissioner Hopkins or Commissioner Hakenin, any questions? Commissioner Hopkins, please.
And Trevor, since this is an 8,000 square foot, is that why there's none that are listed on the other side of the highway? Okay,
Yeah, so the lots. So yeah, so the lots with the green stripes are less than 8,000 square feet, and there aren't any in that area of town. The minimum lot size in the SR zone is 20,000 square feet.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, okay, let me jump in, and I had a couple of quick ones. So one of the questions I had, and I think it's good that we're doing kind of Q&A today, and then maybe in our next meeting we can go through the ordinance after the committee's looked at it. We'll go through it in detail, and then maybe finalize it in the second or third discussion. So, but I had a question about the number of housing units in Trinidad, and we currently have 28 STRs with one pending, so that would be 29. But there could be more with the PD and C. PD plan development and C commercial area. So anyway, what I'm getting at is, I thought we had about 144 lots in Trinidad, based on some other document. And I may be wrong, but that would mean that we have 20% roughly vacation rentals. Does that sound right? Or maybe in our next meeting, we can look at that.
Yeah, I can get you some more numbers. I think we do have a more exact count of housing numbers. It's right around 220 are the number of housing units in Trinidad. That includes existing ADUs, but does not include any of the RVs. I think there's around 300 parcels in Trinidad.
Okay. All right, it would be helpful. I don't know what the right number is, but I always kind of mentally go through kind of what percentage feels about right for a kind of we are a tourist destination town. We are a coastal town, but we also want to maintain, good communities, good neighborhoods, quality of life. And so I don't know what the exact right number is, but in my mind, I've had a number of around 15%, kind of felt right based on what I've read in other towns and so forth. And I thought based on the numbers I had that we were closer to 20. So it may be lower than that. It may be 13 or 14%, which feels, pretty good.
Yeah, and I think I've got a couple of numbers in my staff report on that. I think 32 or 33 would be about 15% of the housing units.
Okay.
And we did talk about having a cap based on percentage of housing units, and so that, as we develop more housing, the cap would go up. We decided not to do that because of the difficulty of managing that, and getting exact counts on the number of housing units, and how quickly that could change.
Okay.
But yeah, we've been in the about 14% for the last few years with the 30 to 31 STRs.
Okay, yeah, and I noticed in the middle of page 3, you do have some. There's like the difference between an overall cap and then the cap by type of, the zoning is sometimes a little confusing. So for example, I guess my next question was, how can we have STRs in planned development, zones? Because by its definition, I thought planned development was there's no development or it's being planned. But
yeah, it was sort of a poorly named. Planned development is usually more of an overlay zone in most communities, and it's used on large parcels where there's some flexibility and clustering development and things like that. So that's the normal type of planned development in Trinidad.
Okay.
Really what it is, it's a mixed use zone.
Okay.
And in the general plan update, we're proposing to change the name to mixed use zone. There are a couple of large parcels in the PD zone that maybe that kind of plan development might work. I think, what I envision at this point would be, maybe a cap in the PD zone, but then you can allow more with a use permit so that there's not a set cap, but the planning commission could consider it on a case-by-case basis. For a variety of reasons. One, I think that would be maybe a little easier to get through the coastal commission. Two, it gives a little more flexibility as, we get more second units or other housing developments to sort of increase that. Because the PD zone, you can have a whole mix of businesses in that zone. And so that was sort of the intent. And that's why it was felt that having STRs in the PD zone wouldn't be as disruptive, because you can have a business in that zone as well. One advantage of STRs in the PD zone is that they remain residential and they can be easily converted back to a residence, where if they are converted to a business, they're not quite as easy to convert back to a residence. So that's just one. So I think, there has been an uptick in inquiries for STRs in the PD zone. So, and maybe some of the other restrictions in terms of adjacency or, there's owners who own multiple STRs in the PD zones, which we have a restriction on in the UR zone. So maybe expanding some of those limitations to the PD zone as well might be something to consider.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that would be something to think about. And I'm glad that Commissioner Johnson asked about adjacency, because it was one of the concerns that some of the citizens have raised to me personally, and these just in discussions about this have been that they're surrounded by STR. So, if you live in a neighborhood and you've maybe got one STR, I'm personally surrounded by STRs, but I have a buffer. And whereas some folks don't have a buffer. And I think that's a good, I was very empathetic to their situation. So that's, adjacency is I don't have an answer for it, because I understand we've grandfathered these in, but I can see why folks would be concerned about that. All right, seeing no other comments, I guess, or questions from the commissioners. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Stockness. Need to come off mute. There we go.
Trevor, I'm confused about 24 on the map. What is that?
Oh, it's just a big piece of property, and it has one house on that one piece of property, and it's one STR.
Oh, is that the Nash? The Nashes?
No, Nash is number 20.
Number 20. Where's 20?
So maybe that's
Just
Raven
up
House,
the coast.
150 Scenic, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Raven House.
Oh, there's
150
20.
Scenic.
Okay, I see it.
Yeah,
So is that scenic?
that big one. The big one, is that what you're asking, Diane?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I believe it is. I think that's the
Is
one
that-
that's
is that
150
on-
Scenic.
Well, number 3 is Hasselquist's second unit. So number 3 is 150 Scenic.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think 24 is 130 Scenic.
Oh, right, Osprey House. Okay.
Okay,
Wow, great
because
names.
it doesn't correspond to the map that we got.
Oh,
up
yeah.
there.
So these are last year's numbers. So they're
Okay.
not going to match up to the list you have, the current list.
Okay. Yeah, because I was trying to figure it out. The ones around my house are okay. I can figure those out. Okay.
All right, I'm going to ask Commissioner Johnson if he has any questions or comments.
I'll just add a little bit of humor here, just so that everybody doesn't feel too bad. The ratio of STRs to develop parcels in my little community is 36%. So don't get too worried.
Yeah, ouch.
And the deal about adjacency is parking,
Hmm.
the ones that were grandfathered in, and then that is a huge neighborhood issue, and that was one of the biggest issues when we were writing the STR ordinance.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. All right, I'm going to open to public comments. Are there any public comments about Councilman Clumpus? Please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate all the hard work, and this is a difficult topic for a number of reasons. But what I'm trying to understand is, does the city's general plan have to have some content on affordable housing and the impact of STRs in a city? And I'm trying to see whether or not that would influence downstream what the SDR committee or what the planning commission might assess based on that information. Can someone perhaps help me understand that principle, that association with STRs? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's an issue that has come up repeatedly with STRs. It's not something I found a lot of data on when we were developing our last ordinance. I can see if there is now some new data. Again, looking at housing prices and things like that in Trinidad, it didn't appear that STRs were a significant influence. And, you know, there have been STRs where, you know, people live in them the majority of the year and then rent them out in the summer or whatever. So in some ways it can make housing more affordable. But in general, the houses that are STRs are never going to be affordable. You know, they're $1 million homes. So what we're working on, and yes, the general plan does have to address housing and affordability. So what we're working on with the next item with ADUs, with accessory dwelling units, and then the junior accessory dwelling units, which I think hold a lot of promise for Trinidad, is those would not be allowed to be STRs. They would, you know, they would be smaller units, so they would be more affordable to begin with, and they would not be allowed to be STRs.
The other comment I wanted to make was about reviewing and setting the licensing fees. Some cities have recently reviewed this and raised it based upon safety expenses of additional police patrols or other items in order to keep the order, so to speak, and keep residents feeling safe with folks that come in to STRs. And is it the responsibility of the STR committee to review that process? Or is it the planning commission that would step in to review that application fee as well? Thank you.
That's probably more in the realm of the city council. So I believe, you know, licensing fees are currently set by city council. And I believe that's why part of the reason Angela is collecting, you know, staff time. She's looking at staff time, you know, what it takes to issue licenses and to manage licenses, so that can, you know, be used to better inform the next update for the fees. And then of course, in addition, STRs pay the TOT tax to the city, which is used for, you know, policing and other types of things. But, you know, obviously, you know, the city does not have a full-time police department, and, you know, enforcement is not totally satisfactory to some people. Although I'll say I live in a city that does have a full-time police department, and enforcement there isn't always immediate and satisfactory either. So
Yeah, and to that point, there was a discussion about getting a code enforcement officer for the STR. So that might be something that down the road we take a look at vis-a-vis fees and the tax, the tourist tax.
Okay, and thank you. And just my final comment was that some areas for STRs remain unlimited. Richard Johnson mentioned 36% in his area of STRs. I think probably at one point, it was never a concept that there might be more and more STRs, but just like the city went through limiting in its most central location, perhaps the Planning Commission STR committee could look at limiting STRs in all locations to make sure that things just don't simply get out of hand with development. Thank you. That's my final comment.
Thank you very much. Other public comments regarding STRs? Ms. Levine, please.
I would like to understand Richard's comment in the city looking at limiting STRs outside of the city. I don't understand what is meant by that. Does that mean that the city is looking into limiting STRs in the sphere of influence?
So that is a really good question. I understood Councilmember Klompus's question or comment to be related to the different zones within the city limits, which you're right, would be the purview of the Planning Commission. Outside the city limits, we don't make those determinations.
Thank you.
Perhaps, yes, thank you. And perhaps Councilman Klompus, did I state that correctly for you? Yeah, okay. All right, thank you for that clarification, Ms. Lean.
Thank you.
All right, let's see, other comments. I see no other members of the public, I don't think, on here. I have my chat window open, but I don't see anyone else. Okay, so I'm going to then, I believe we're going to close off the discussion of the STRs for this particular meeting with the idea that we will hear back from the STR committee, and we will also review the ordinance most likely in an upcoming meeting. I won't guarantee which one yet, but one of the upcoming meetings. Okay, let's move on. Everybody okay?
Just once before we move on. So I also want to just make sure that if the Planning Commission wants additional regulations or wants to change things, I'm prepared to talk about it at the next meeting. So, we've talked about a cap in the PD zone. We've talked about maybe some information about affordability and number of housing units. Is there anything else you would like additional information on so that we can consider it in more detail at the next meeting? Or did that cover
I
it?
think that sounds good. Anything else, anyone?
And maybe
Commissioner
the
Sanchez?
maybe the fees for the license. Did they go up this year, or are they 300?
I will look at where the fees stand and see where that is at.
Okay, and in the ordinance, is enforcement in there or not?
It is. So there is a complaint process in there, and the city did develop a little bit more specific complaint process and flow chart, because the ordinance does allow the city manager to enact administrative regulations to help implement the ordinance. So that's why I said that most of the STR committee recommendations thus far could be implemented administratively. Even the definition of meet and greet, I think the city manager could make that an administrative rule. Although I think it would be best if we're updating the ordinance anyway. Let's include that definition. But yeah, so there is definitely some area for to refine and add more details for enforcement and implementation.
So is enforcement under dispute resolution or what?
So it's probably.
Oh,
20
violations. It would be
Yeah,
under
Yeah,
violation.
so, and then you see section Q is administrative standards and rules. And then the violations is really where the complaint process is and, you know, what are violations and how they're dealt with.
Okay, so one of the issues with the STR committee was the managers, the property managers don't want to collect the money. So, you know, we went back and forth with Eli about this. And so that we need to talk about that a little bit, maybe get, you know, some background. Maybe Johnson has some ideas. So that one wasn't, we didn't bring that one up, and that's a hot topic. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and that was addressed
thank
by
you.
our city attorney.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Heikkinen, did you have something to add?
Just briefly, Trevor, since you're asking for things to bring back, I'd love to maybe just touch on or get a brief education on what the complaint process is, what the violation, you know, I know there's I apologize for the overhead speaker. I can't turn that off. The watch list, that kind of stuff. Has that been used? Those types of things. Just more education for me. I've just, you know, the meetings I've attended over the last couple of years where this has been a topic, there's a tremendous amount of passion over violations and complaints and resolution and perception of resolution and whether or not it's been addressed. And I just want to understand, is there enough of a feedback loop to folks that lodge a complaint or concern that they're feeling at least they're being heard, and perhaps that could, you know, damp down some of the passion around the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I can provide that.
Excellent point. Okay. All right, with that, we are going to move to our second agenda item, which is the ADU ordinance, which is a continued discussion and decision on amending the city's non-certified ADU ordinance 2012-02 to meet state housing laws and the Coastal Act while addressing local conditions and constraints. And so this is a continuation from the April 21st meeting where a good discussion was had from what I understand. And so let me, with that, Trevor, maybe you can lead us into that discussion, part two.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the state law requires cities to allow ADUs, certain ADUs under various circumstances, basically administratively or ministerially. So, you know, if they can check all the boxes, you can't deny them. The Trinidad has been somewhat buffered from that being a coastal zone because our local ordinance has been certified by the Coastal Commission. So in some sense, it has the same force and effect as a state law. And so our ordinance still stands as of now. But at the last meeting, I provided some guidance from both Housing and Community Development Department and the Coastal Commission on ADUs to provide a little bit more background on that back and forth and what the cities are required to do. One of the things I noticed when I jumped into this ordinance, it is funded under our SB2 grant that, you know, as of right now runs out at the end of 2021. And I don't know if we can get any kind of extension on that. So, but it is so dense. You know, the city adopted an ADU ordinance in 2012 that basically just set forth the state guidelines, the state regulations at the time, and it was fairly straightforward then. The Coastal Commission requested a whole bunch of analysis on how ADUs would impact coastal resources. And we had also submitted our first VDU ordinance at the same time. And so the city decided to we didn't have the information or the means to get the information or do the analysis that the Coastal Commission requested back in 2012. So we withdrew that and just pursued the VDU ordinance at that time. Most of the information requested by the Coastal Commission had to do with water, wastewater, and parking impacts and sustainability. And now we basically have that information. Once the parking study is completed, we've got, the water demand and other water reports that were done in 2018, maybe going into 2019. We have the geotech and groundwater study that looked at infiltration for stormwater, but that applies the same to wastewater and its effects on groundwater. And they sort of modeled how much water can be dumped into certain areas of the city. So we have that information now, so I think we can move forward. But because of the complexity of the current ordinance, we decided to kind of pursue it piece by piece. And so I've presented just a couple of pieces for you. So one are regulations for what are called JADUs or junior accessory dwelling units. And I think those hold a lot of promise in Trinidad. Those actually aren't required by the state, although the state has regulations for them if you're going to allow them. But those are carved out of existing residences and have to include a bedroom and only include what's known as an efficiency kitchen. And so the Coastal Commission doesn't consider them development. The health department doesn't consider them development for septic systems. They're not, they wouldn't be expected to use more water, produce more wastewater or parking and things like that than the single family residence they were carved out of. So I think they hold a lot of promise. And so I have, and that's a nice full set of regulations for them. So I've included those mostly based on the state standards for those. I did have a couple of issues I would like the Planning Commission to specifically address. The state regulations call for an efficiency kitchen that's defined as having a cooking facility with appliances and a food preparation counter and storage cabinets that are a reasonable size in relation to the size of the JADU. And so I found some other ordinances that define that more specifically. So I provided some examples. I'd like some input. And then talking about location is an issue for both JADUs and accessory dwelling units. I'm suggesting that they would be allowed anywhere. Let's see. One thing, the state regulations allow JADUs to be converted from, they still have to include at least one bedroom, but they can also include a garage and convert a garage. So then that's increased living space. So I do have an inquiry into CCC Coastal Commission staff as to whether they would consider that development because you're increasing the living space in the residence. Oh, and then the idea, so JADUs have to have an exterior door, but the state regulations don't say anything about an interior door, but a number of the ordinances I looked at do require an interior door. And that might be so that they can be converted back to a single family residence more easily. I'm not exactly sure. So that was another question I had, if you want to require that or not. And then the other issue I wanted to talk about tonight was location of ADUs. So I don't know if you want to tackle JADUs and then get into ADUs later, maybe, and then I can maybe give my the rest of my staff report then, or if you want it all right now, or if it might be overwhelming.
Junior, I was just saying, let's start with the junior ADUs and then we'll work up to the seniors, I guess. One clarifying question I have real quick, since I wasn't at the last meeting, is do the JADUs are not required by law, the ADUs are, but does a JADU count as an ADU? Okay, so the idea would be we're kind of getting credit for them, for the JADUs, and they fit a little bit better with the kind of the makeup, the context of Trinidad.
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, JADUs would count towards our required housing allocation. So,
Okay.
and then to get to Diane's question earlier, we can't count existing housing. So all the existing ADUs were in theory created before 1980. They're non-conforming existing ADUs, I guess, except for Hasselquist, the Raven House was converted illegally and then got subsequent approval because he had enough space on his property to accommodate an ADU. So that was granted as a use permit. But for the most part, ADUs are existing non-conforming, and we can't count existing housing towards our allocation.
Okay, and a single property can accommodate one JADU and one ADU, right?
Under
So
the
it can have
state-
both,
Under
under
the
state law.
state law, yes. I'm not
Okay.
sure that's appropriate for Trinidad.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the state law, because I wasn't sure at first, like, could you have, you know, a 10 JADUs and an ADU or two ADU, you know, it's like, what's the cap, I guess, per property? But it sounded like by state law, you could have one of each, so.
In a single family zone, you can have one of each. In a multifamily zone, you can have multiple ADUs depending on how many housing units there are. JDUs are not allowed in multifamily zones under the state law.
Right, okay, all right, thank you. All right, let me open it up to questions and comments from the commissioners. And we're specifically at this point talking about the JADUs. Commissioner Heikkinen, I believe I saw your hand up, and then Commissioner Johnson after that.
Yeah, I just had a couple comments. One regarding, and Cheryl, you kind of touched on it, but also I didn't know if it would be appropriate in Trinidad, or maybe it already exists, to limit the placement of an ADU and an STR and a JADU on the same property by statute. I think that might be a good idea for the city, and with us discussing the STR ordinance right now, because, you know, while I agree there's a tremendous need for affordable housing, I don't want to see, you know, kind of single family residences turned into, you know, kind of getting around it that way. And the clarification, so they have to have their own external access, right? A separate, distinct one from the main residence. Okay. But as I understood it, access to a bathroom, that can be a shared common bathroom inside the building, right?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. And then the other comment I had, I made a note also about the door comment, the interior one. Just kind of my personal thought is, if the goal is to try and make this as easy as possible, I don't know why we would dictate how somebody wants to manage the interior of their home. Just kind of from my thought process. And I think there was one comment I had on page 3 of 5. You're talking about checking with the Coastal Commission staff whether or not we could convert them into JDUs would be considered development. But wouldn't that still violate state law, was my question, because you said they can't be created within a detached structure, but then you're talking about the ones with the wet bars that could kind of be quasi-converted. Even if the Coastal Commission says yes, would we still be allowed to, or is that still violation under state law?
Well, in general, the state law says that cities can't be more restrictive.
Okay.
But I don't see why we couldn't. That is a good question. I will, HCD has a like a hotline for ADU questions. So I can ask that because it does say in there that you can't convert a detached accessory structure, but we have a lot of those
Into a
in
JD, right?
Trinidad.
Yeah.
You can or cannot. I didn't quite hear that, Trevor.
Well, the state law says a JDU can't be in a detached accessory structure. But
Okay.
that intent was that the idea of that was that you can't convert a detached garage or something that's not living space into a separate detached JADU. But what we have in Trinidad is we've permitted detached accessory structures to be permitted as part of the single family residence. So you're still carving out space out of an existing single family residence if you converted those to JADUs. So it's kind of a nuance. And I will email HCD about that.
It does seem like detached would be, to keep it clean, could be more of an ADU, because just going back to the bathroom, right? The facilities, you would need to then require a bathroom, I would think, if it's detached. It could be wrong, but you certainly have people going in, walking into the house to.
And
Yeah, no,
I'm not going to go into any more detail. I think you guys understand what I'm talking about.
yeah,
And I
that
guess
makes sense. And
my last just question for Trevor or Eli, I guess, is do you have any sense, kind of anecdotally, is there a demand in Trinidad for junior ADUs? I agree, it seems like a really creative and neat solution, but I'm just curious, are there people asking, hey, are you guys looking into this?
No, I have not. But we also rarely get inquiries for ADUs anymore either, because I think people know that they're not allowed. And I think that if the city did some public outreach to let people know that this is allowed, we would get some.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have seen some comments in, Trinidad next door in various places, people looking for housing for students, for example, who are looking for places and affordable housing. And anyway. Other comments and questions? Commissioner Johnson, I believe you were next. Yeah, go ahead. And then after you, Commissioner Hopkins.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused, Trevor, with respect to what we're doing here. I finally figured out that in the changes to the ordinance, the italics that you've given us, and confirm this for me, that anything in italics is something that's above and beyond the state regulations. Is that correct? Okay, and so where did those requirements come from?
From the ordinance that I stole these regulations from. And I thought they might be good ideas.
Okay, so these are just proposed. Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, and so I apologize for the confusion, but I did want to show changes from the existing ordinance. Even though these are brand new regulations, the city does have an adopted ADU ordinance. And so that's why I used the track changes the way I did. And I apologize if it seems confusing.
Okay, well, that gives me some idea what we're talking about. The reason is that there were, in the original ADU ordinance, there were a number of government codes that were referenced, and they all went away. And so I wasn't sure if, well, the question, I guess, is the intent to delete them from the revised ADU ordinance?
Yeah, so the ordinance I gave you at the last meeting just had sort of notes. I think that's what you're referring to, where it had notes for, I think, changes in the state ADU law under the various sections.
Were they just notes? Is that it?
I think that they were just notes at that time, yes. And so that wouldn't be the ordinance that I'm revising. Now we don't have to track changes from our existing ordinance. We can just rescind and have a new one, and that might be a little easier for tracking changes as we move through this process. So I'm happy to just accept all the changes, and we can, pretend like we're starting from scratch. That might be a little bit easier to do.
Okay, well, that gives me an idea. I'll go back and look at the original one and compare. A couple of real quick comments. Obviously, you want some input on the requirements for the kitchenette or efficiency kitchen. So I'll give a couple of them real fast. In your staff report on page 205, you've listed a couple of things that you think would make sense, and most of them are pretty clear. But I think that there's an awful lot of ambiguity still in this, and I don't know. Actually, I've been struggling with whether or not to make it more definitive or to keep it pretty general, because we have been in this argument about what constitutes a kitchen since ever. And it's a very tiresome conversation because everybody has a different an opinion of what a kitchen or a kitchenette is supposed to be. But I would point out that, for example, when we say full-size gas, electric, or propane cooking appliances, full-size is very nebulous, and I think that there may be some desire to kind of crisp that up. Food storage cabinets, which is the last bullet there, it says 30 square feet of shelf space. That's a huge amount of shelf space. And I just did a quick calculation using my shelves, and my kitchen's not that big, but that's a lot of cabinets. So I thought that maybe if we change that to cubic feet, it might be a little bit easier to figure out exactly what would be defined as an efficiency kitchen. For example, a 5 cubic feet set of storage cabinets or whatever. And I'm assuming also in that is that that does not include the cold food storage. In other words, there is a small refrigerator that's allowable, and so somebody's going to ask the question, well, does that count as food storage? And obviously we have to make either an inclusion or an exception to that. I had another question about a passageway, and the way it's described, and now that I think about it, I'm not sure if that's under ADUs or JDUs, but I'll still ask the question because I think it'll come up. The way you have described it is that it must have an unobstructed view of the sky. But what wasn't clear is if someone wanted to put up sides to it. And I have seen passageways which are a combination of pergolas, side barriers that protect against wind and rain, etc. So I'm not saying that we have to decide what it is tonight, but I think there may be a little bit more definition required for that. A couple of other kind of little nits, but I'll just mention them while I'm here on page 3 of 4 of the revised ordinance under JDUs. Under building and fire requirements, it says that the JDU shall be equipped with at least one smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector. I think it would be very important to understand whether or not that has to be hardwired or could be, plug-in kind of thing. But in any event, I think it's important, if we want hardwired, people will try to put in just a plug-in. So it's important, I think, to define that. And as well, down under OWTS, if the last sentence there says, if one doesn't already exist, a reserve leach field area shall be approved by the health officer if feasible. That implies to me that you only have to say that there is a leach field that is approved. It doesn't say that it has to be there. And maybe I'm making a little bit of a mountain out of a molehill, but I really think that we should say something to the effect that a reserve leach field is to be required, because I think that's what we're basically doing with the OWTS ordinance. So to me, it sounds like we should be consistent with the wording. At least what I understand what we're trying to do is to make sure that all the OWTSs are up to code or up to the ordinance requirements. And this kind of is a wishy-washy way of saying that, maybe you don't. And then the final thing there is on page 3 or 4 under item M, the deed restriction. It says a deed restriction shall be recorded that may be enforced against future purchasers. I'm not exactly sure what we intended there. I know the idea is that a JDU can go back and be reverted back to a single family residence. And so it wasn't clear to me, and maybe we just need a little bit of extra language in there, that if that what we were trying to do there was to say that future purchases could revert the JDU back to the primary residence, or what were we trying to do in terms of enforcement against future purchases? It was very unclear to me. We talked about the map, and those are kind of my comments at this point. I'm still a little hazy on an ADU is not considered an accessory building or accessory use. But then yet we defined an ADU as a structure that is accessory and incidental to the dwelling. So we don't have to get into that discussion right now, but that I think still needs a little bit of clarification. I'm referring to on page 204 when it says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about location for ADUs. My mistake. Okay. Scratch that comment. We can cover that later.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Hopkins, I believe you had a comment as well.
Yeah, I realized that mine was for ADU also. The
Okay.
JADUs are pretty straightforward, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. So on JADU, so first of all, Commissioner Heikkinen put the definition for the kitchenette in the chat window. It was the one that I think Trevor pulled from for this page 205.
This is one I found.
Description.
I was just looking earlier today. Sonoma, the
Yeah.
city of Sonoma. I don't know if that's where you got it from, Trevor.
It looks the same, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
They listed some examples of appliances that would or wouldn't count, kind of a little bit more specificity there of kind of really give folks, including but not limited to, give them like, okay, you know what we're trying to say here, kind of an idea.
Oh, I see. Yeah, microwave oven, hot plate, etc. So kind of I read one that just said plug-in appliances. So plug-in appliances, including those types of things on small refrigerators, like minimum size. So if I understand correctly, there's a state guidance for JADUs and what constitutes a kitchenette. And so in broad terms, and what I'm a little confused about, so by state regulation, it doesn't have to have a sink, for example. If we say in our ordinance that it does have to have a sink, aren't we then restricting? And also the same, I guess, would go with the OWTS, saying that someone needs to come out and check and make sure that septic needs are being met. Where I feel like that may be counter to the intent of the state law. And so I think that's something we should think about. Like as we add more restrictions or requirements, I should say, do those then become restrictions? So if you want to make a JADU in town, you have a spare bedroom and you don't have a sink in it, you know, then by our ordinance, we would say, oh, you have to have a sink. Well, now we're in conflict, I believe, with the state law. So I think it's something that we should think about, is just to start with, you know, what the state law says, and be careful not to add too much more to it, to be honest. I was glad to see, though, that we had something about, you know, meeting, you know, kind of the overall dwellings, building and fire requirements, because the first thing I thought of was having a smoke detector, carbon monoxide, and maybe a fire extinguisher if you're going to be using a lot of hot plates. might be a good idea. Let's see, I'm just looking through my notes. Agree with you about the door, the interior door. I don't think we can require it, just, you know, per what I said a minute ago, but separate entrance, that was required by state law. So I think that makes good sense. Sorry, I'm just going through one by one here. I too have some comments in here that I think are more applicable to the ADUs. So does the city want to consider allowing JADUs in any multifamily development? And I would say no, because again, the state law was single family. And I don't know that we necessarily need to expand beyond that. So that's all I had. It was mainly just, you know, kind of trying to stay with the intent of the and the spirit of the law, and not, you know, make our ordinances too restrictive. And that's it for me. Okay, so final thoughts, Commissioner Stockness?
I just find it very confusing to add junior ADUs, STRs, and single residences. I know we're in a housing crisis. And we battled that efficiency kitchen around when we talked about the ADUs. So I definitely don't want them in the multifamily development. And somehow we need to keep a list of residents, ADUs that are on the property, and JADUs. And if they've got extra garage, we just need to have a map for each residence that's going to have an ADU, a JADU, and a house. So we know what kind of parking and how many people are there. And I know we need housing, but this is like loading up a trailer with, you know, a family of 8. And I am definitely, I guess, with the deed restriction, that's why I came up with, you know, somehow tracking the property, what is on the property. And I think the city has a right to know what's on the property, for safety and septic. And then what Aaron was talking about and Richard with the fire, you know, the fire system, because everything now has to have a sprinkler. You know, anything that's, so I don't know, this is a really tough issue for me. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Stockness. So you raised something that I hadn't thought of, though, which is a permit process. So would a permit be required then for a JADU or an ADU? I was assuming yes, but
It's not
correct? Trevor, shaking
It is a permit required, but it's like a building permit.
Okay.
Wouldn't come to you guys, but
Right.
it would go through a city administrative approval process.
Okay, so we wouldn't be able to track them then, Diane. That's what I was getting to.
We would be able to track them, yes.
So who's going to make that decision? Ross or you or Gabe or Eli? One of those?
That's a good question. It might be, you know, it probably be either Ann, myself, or Ross.
Okay, thank you. That's where I would say it should be. Okay,
Or both. I mean, it might be both. I can respond to a couple of issues that came up. So the kitchen definition is that's a maximum. So what I have in
Oh.
the regulations is you can't have more than what's in there.
Okay,
So it wouldn't be, they don't have to have a sink. They don't have to have.
I see. Okay.
And then, although the state law does require those minimums, so it might have a minimum and a maximum. So basically you can't, for things like the smoke detector, sprinklers, you can't require anything more of an ADU or a JADU than what the residence was required. So, like sprinklers, specifically sprinklers are addressed for ADUs. So all new construction has to have sprinklers, I think. But if it's an older single family residence that wasn't required to have sprinklers, you can't require sprinklers for the ADU. I
And
think
Trevor,
same
that,
with-
just to clarify, that includes even, for example, if I were to convert the garage underneath my master bedroom to a living space, because my existing home doesn't have it, that does not need to then as well.
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. So we can't, like, we can require stricter than building code requirements, but only if it's for all single family residences. Otherwise, we basically stick to building code requirements. The state law does allow provisions for health department approval for septic systems. So we can require
Okay.
that. That is specifically in there. The reserve area, Richard, is just that. It's just a reserve area. So it wouldn't be constructed. It would just be approved, so that in case the existing leach field fails, you have space to replace it. That's what the reserve area is. The deed restriction, that language is straight from the state law. But I can look at what the intent is and how that's worded to see if we can make that more clear. We would definitely include provisions that ADUs and JADUs cannot be STRs. For JADUs, we can require owner occupancy. So you can require that the owner of the property reside in either the residence or the JADU. For ADUs, that used to be the case, but from 2020 to 2025, under the state law, we can't require owner occupancy of an ADU or the primary residence. So that might answer some of the questions that came up.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I'm going to open to public comments at this time. If there are any public comments regarding ADUs or JADUs. All right. I see no public comments with regard to those topics, so we'll come back to the Planning Commission. I think you have, Trevor, you have what you need then. Are there any other burning questions that you'd like folks to answer or topics we didn't cover so that we can move ahead?
Let's see, let me go through. Well, so would you rather basically have this ordinance as if we're starting from scratch? Do you want to see it compared to the 2012 ordinance? No, I see some head shaking.
I wouldn't mind starting from scratch and then having the 2012 ordinance to refer to.
And then we can refer to that,
Others?
and then I'll only use track changes as we change from meeting to meeting.
The new one, yeah.
Okay, I think
That-
that makes sense.
Does that work for everybody though? That was just my off the cuff response. Okay. That looks like we're getting thumbs up.
And is there any additional input on for kitchens? I think based on the discussion, I can refine that a little bit, but there wasn't necessarily a clear consensus on that.
So just for clarification, so the minimum would be the minimum required by state law, right? That's the min bar.
Which is
The
a
max.
kitchen facility with appliances and a food preparation counter and storage cabinets that are reasonable size in relation to the size of the JADU.
Okay, and then we would say the max would be the sink, the 30 or so square or cubic feet of food preparation and storage, that kind of thing. Is that what you're thinking, Trevor?
Yeah, and then some of these, some of those bullets, at least 3 square feet, but not more than the 30 or the 15. So we could bracket it, or keep it more simple. It's just that these, keep in mind, these are going to be administrative approval. So it's going to be, myself or Ross deciding what is a food preparation counter and storage cabinets that are a reasonable size in relation to the size of the JADU. That does bring to mind that Ross would be a good person to consult. The city's building inspector would be a good person to consult on this.
Yeah.
So I will talk to him about some of those fire requirements, and I can also ask him his thoughts on the kitchen as well.
Yeah, so I guess one of my questions was, for example, on cooking was, I wasn't quite sure whether the state law was that it was plug-in appliances. It just says cooking facilities, right? So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, is propane or gas stove, is that, a max or could be one of the options? Because I don't know, it's a little confusing, but.
Yeah, and I think, with the CAP, the climate action plan we've been talking about, one of the big things with that is converting everything to electric. So getting away from gas in all appliances, all new construction. And so I think this is a good starting point to just go ahead and do that. So no 220, no gas. And that might be a reasonable restriction. It's interesting. Some of the older climate action plans, gas was more efficient than electricity back then, but now, especially with RCEA, Redwood Community Energy Authority, they're going to have Humboldt converted to all renewable electricity by, I forget, 2025, 2030. So that will all, anything electric will be renewable. Changes in the state regulations are starting to make gas more expensive anyway. So it's going to actually come out economically soon anyway. But that's coming, is not having propane anymore.
And it's coming soon. I think it's like 2023. Was that when it's coming?
I'm not sure exact on the timeline.
I mean, there was a huge article a couple weeks ago in the paper about it.
Commissioner Hopkins?
I understand what you're saying about the energy efficiency and all that, but I didn't know if that was just for ADUs and not JADUs. And the same then when we get to handicapped and solar panels, those are all for new constructed ADUs. But the JDUs are pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So so new construction, detached ADUs and even attached ADUs, but in particular detached ADUs, have a whole different set of requirements because that's new construction. It's basically a new residence. A JADU, if they were converting existing living, or if they were converting like a garage that's not existing living space, you know, all the electrical that they add would have to be up to code, but they wouldn't have to upgrade anything else just because they're making it a JADU. But you can require the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide, I think.
So one thing I wasn't sure was in here and probably is the 500 square foot maximum for the JADU. So, I mean, first and foremost, it's under 500 square feet living space. And then there's some portion of that assigned to be quote unquote the kitchen or efficiency kitchen. And then it doesn't have to have a bathroom, but it could have a bathroom, right? Okay.
So basically that size limit really, I mean, these are basically little studios.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a studio apartment.
All right.
I don't know if
think
we're,
I've got-
yeah. I don't know if we answered the question about the kitchen, but.
I think I have enough to refine it, and then we can talk about it more at the next meeting.
Okay. All right. Everybody do your kitchenette homework. AKA efficiency kitchen. There's probably something in the UK. I bet there's a good definition in the UK. That sounds very British, that efficiency kitchen part. All right, moving on. I should know what we're moving on to. We are moving on to commissioner reports. So are there any reports from standing committees?
Did you guys, are you up for talking about ADU locations?
Oh, sorry. We'll go back, rewind. She's reeling me back in. All right, ADUs, locations.
So this was, I just wanted, again, we don't necessarily have to have answers tonight, but just thinking about where ADUs should be allowed, because they are an additional housing unit. They tend to have a full kitchen. I mean, they could be a studio as well, but basically the state law tends to, if I haven't totally figured out when the various size limits apply, but there's a statewide exemption for an ADU that's less than 800 square feet. But then there's another, there's also an 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet if it's got more than one bedroom that applies. But if it's created out of an existing accessory structure, it can be as big as the accessory structure. So if it's a 3,000 square foot barn, it can be 3,000. So there's some weird size limit things. But so ADUs can vary a lot, you know, from more like studios to, you know, basically a second residence. The state does allow local jurisdictions to limit the location of ADUs based on adequacy of water, sewer, parking, for example. So this is where we will have to revisit this once we have the results of our parking study, but I want to at least, you know, let's have it ready because I think this is going to be a difficult ordinance. So we could look at, the state law specifically says you can't have a minimum lot size. However, septic requirements are going to put a limit on lot sizes. You won't be able to have an ADU on a lot that is smaller than a certain size. So I think, you know, and probably 8,000 square feet is around where that's going to be. So, you know, I think the city could justify a minimum lot size if we want to. We could also limit ADUs to certain areas of the city based on a variety of factors. They're supposed to be allowed in all residential zones. We don't necessarily have to allow them in the PD zone. That already allows multifamily development. And then also I included the map from our stormwater study. Actually, there's two maps. So I just want to explain that to you. So figure A1, the yellow dash line is the groundwater study area. So that was the area where they did all the groundwater monitoring and then built this model to model groundwater in that yellow dashed area. And then figure A3, you've got this dark blue area. Now that's the area that was, I mean, I wouldn't say it was arbitrary, but basically based on, you know, knowledge of geology and whatever else, the folks at GHD and those who are developing the model, they drew that box because the model is, you can't just run it. It's very expensive to run. So you can't just pick, you know, all different kinds of scenarios and run the model and see which one works best. So they decided to pick this area and then model dumping a bunch of water into that area and see what happens. And basically within that dark blue area, we know you can basically just infiltrate unlimited amounts of water. So that is safe for infiltration for septic. It's not going to impact septic systems. It's not going to impact groundwater. It's not going to impact bluff stability. Now, and then all that blue area though, some of it wasn't part of the model. So then they also ran the model for the entire yellow area, again, dumping as much water in, you know, a huge rainstorm, everybody's septic build out. And there was a point where everything became saturated, you know, bluff stability went down. So there is a point you can put too much water into areas near the bluffs. But then there's the areas that are outside that study area that really were not a part of that model at all. So we've sort of got three areas and they're not overlaid on these maps. You can't really see them. We've got this blue area that we know we can infiltrate. We've got areas outside this blue area, but inside the project area where we know there's a limit on what you can infiltrate. And then we've got areas outside the study area that weren't a part of the model, so we really don't know. So, you know, I don't know if this map is really that helpful. I would like to use it, but it's a pretty limited area. You know, we could limit ADUs within a certain distance from a bluff would be one option. Or we could limit ADUs to this dark blue area unless they do a hydrologic study, is another option. So anyway, I don't have, you know, strong guidance on how to use this. I just wanted to present the information and get some feedback on, you know, various factors that the city can use to limit where ADUs can and should be located.
All right, comments or questions? Commissioner Johnson.
So
And
Trevor,
Commissioner Stockman.
I guess I keep going back to the OWTS ordinance. And if the system is sized to accommodate the additional living space and the performance measurements that are made on a periodic basis demonstrate that the OWTS is satisfying those requirements, why do we need to worry about a zone for infiltration? It's already physically demonstrated through the OWTS. I guess a simple way of putting it is if you've got a system which has been sized for a certain size parcel, and it will accommodate via the requirements of the OWTS, is there a problem? I mean, are we making this too difficult for ourselves, or am I missing something?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't think, well, so it's not just the OWTS though, it's the amount of water going into the groundwater system. So OWTS is really about the treatment and not about the area and the amount of soil that you need to treat that wastewater, but it's not about how much water is going into the ground and how that's going to affect groundwater levels and bluff stability. So you start to get denser and denser septic systems, and yes, you might have the area that you need for them, but if you start pumping too much water into, generally Trinidad has sandy enough soils that you're not going to affect groundwater levels to the point that you're going to, raise groundwater levels and affect leach fields. I think that's really not a danger. But how much water, the bluff stability is closely tied to saturation of the soils. So if you're putting, a lot of water, if you're increasing density and more people and they're using more water right next to the bluff, and you have a big rainstorm and they're it's a long shot that it would impact bluff stability, I think, but I think the Coastal Commission, that's going to be one of the issues they bring up. And so that's why I was sort of thinking limiting them within a certain distance of the bluff, or requiring, some sort of hydrologic study or something for places that are near bluffs, just so that we can say that increased amount of water and density isn't going to impact coastal resources.
So since we have already an approved ADU ordinance, now I realize that it's approved at the city level. Did we just not address this infiltration issue before? And this is something now that we should have looked at before. And I guess that's what my question is. We should have looked at it before, but we didn't. Is that what you're saying?
I don't necessarily would say that we should. I think it's never been looked at before. And again, what I should give you at the next meeting probably would be the Coastal Commission's letter that they wrote regarding the city's ADU ordinance, and you can see what they brought up. Basically, they want the city to show that ADUs aren't going to have impacts on bluff stability. And I don't know how to show that except with this study.
Okay, I see where you're going, and in fact, I was just looking at my notes last week or last month, and one of my notes has to do with it's more than just water from OWTS. So I guess I stand corrected. Okay.
Commissioner Sockness, I believe you had some
So
comments.
I know, Trevor, the filtration zone is basically the flat part of town, from the freeway to the shopping center to the school to maybe Ocean. And a little bit of Underwood. You did the stormwater study, we did the erosion of the bluff, we did the Van Wyck Trail, all that is eroding, okay? Or we're getting water flow from rain. So we did that, we got the stormwater drains, and that's good. So this looks like the area for ADUs. I'm not real excited, but I know we have to have housing. So this seems like that's gonna be where it's gonna be. And they have to have a permit, right? Or they don't?
They do. So, the city has to allow a certain subset of ADUs ministerially. So again, basically just a building permit. But we can require another subset, larger, closer to the bluffs, things like that, that require planning commission approval.
Well, a map is what I'm looking for. Because Richard, said that the OWTS taking care of the septic issue. And then if this study shows that water will go into the ground and it'll be fine. It's not gonna, erode or flow out in the street because we have all the stormwater drains now. So my main concern is I just want him to map, where the JADU is, where the ADU is, where their residence is, where their OWTS is, and then we'll have an idea of what is on the property and what are the square footages of each structure. And then I think the neighborhood people will feel better if they know, there's not a big ADU. The JDU has, 2 doors or a garage. It could get confusing. And then you're going to get the public comment and, whatever, because of that. We just need to track it with permits and a map, just like, when we do the STRs, or people want a permit to build, they need, a licensed contractor, architect, or they need really detailed plans that show, or map that shows how big it is.
Commissioner Hopkins?
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
done.
I think it would be
Sorry,
cleaner
you're
if there
done.
was a map like what you have here. Because then if they bring it up to the planning commission, well, we're gonna say, it's gonna get sticky. Say somebody has an ocean view and, they're gonna say, we could put that ADU here no matter what. If we have, but then we're gonna say, no, we don't want that to be there. And I mean, I could see where it would be better to just have the house be planned and not the ADU plan. And those will all have to be approved, I'm assuming. Like, instead of, if we just, anybody along the bluff could start bringing in little tiny units, it could get ugly, I think. So I like the idea of just having the map on the inner of town as a start. So anyway, that's my input.
Commissioner Heikkinen?
Yeah, I think because we have the data, the hydrologic data for that zone where they ran the study for the infiltration, I think that's a great starting point. I like your thought about requiring additional analysis or review if somebody wants to do something outside of that. To a certain extent, that can be free data for us as a planning commission. If we have somebody do a survey and they have to find out more, and then we know, my gosh, it's more data to have, and we can still decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not we can expand that and approve outside of that area. But yeah, I think a map showing within this area, yes, we're good. And then the other question I had is, would this be an opportunity to look at adjacency requirements when it comes to ADUs, JDUs, and STRs? Obviously, with this is going to come parking. That's a natural cause and effect of adding housing. And one of the concerns I've heard from the STR situation is the adjacency and parking that causes. So could we add something in along those lines and just kind of try and make sure that we're not putting, just totally saturating an area and try and spread out the parking needs a little bit. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, a good consideration. I think the issue is going to be we can't limit that unless we can show that to not limit it would impact coastal resources, which could include parking. It's going to be an interesting, I do definitely want to bring the Coastal Commission into this discussion sooner rather than later, because, a big part of the state law limits what you can require for parking, and a lot of ADUs you cannot require parking, but I think that is problematic in Trinidad.
Are we able to just limit them as a city with the adjacency requirements irrespective of parking, or is that not allowable under the law because that starts becoming a limitation on the ADU? Okay, all right. Could we get at it a different way and approach it the same concept, but tackle it from the STR standpoint as we're reviewing that, and limit the placement of STRs in the vicinity of ADUs and JADUs, since we have regulation and control over that?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, you could.
That ordinance also has to go through the Coastal Commission. And again,
Sure.
the Coastal Commission is generally going to be supportive of STRs, and they're going to want justification for
Okay.
additional limits on STRs.
And with STRs, is there any wiggle room on parking being consideration for those? Or
Yes.
no? There is. Okay.
Yes.
So then there might be a little bit of leverage there. Okay.
Yeah, so I found a little grid that kind of compares ADUs and JADUs, and I just need to validate that it's accurate, because it says the maximum unit size is generally up to 1,200 square feet or 50% of the living area. And that's, I think I may have gotten this from the League of California Cities, but I need to go look at my source. And that kitchens and bathrooms are required in ADUs. Separate entrances, depends. Parking depends, and owner occupancy depends. So on the criteria, right? So I guess if we could say, if I look at this map and I kind of overlay in my mind the project area for the stormwater improvement with the number of parcels in town that are more than 8,000 square feet, there are not very many that would qualify. So if we said, and I just don't know if we can legally do that, because the California state law doesn't say you can limit by parcel size. But if we could say that, then, you would be then putting these in places where there's enough property to kind of accommodate it. And then from a building code perspective, the view shed issue, I think we can deal with, because we can limit the height and things like that. And the setbacks and so forth. But there would be very few that would qualify. And I think it would make sense that then you overlay, yet again, layer number 3 is the zones, right? So the suburban residential, the urban residential, question mark on plan development, question mark, I guess, on visitor services, because I don't know, that not to bring up the trailer park, but the trailer park is listed as visitor services, but it's no longer really visitor services, right? It's been grandfathered in as more of a month to month, almost an ADU kind of model. And then special environment. I don't know if special environment would qualify. There aren't very many special environment properties. I'm not sure how we define special environment, but that's a question mark too. So the obvious ones are suburban residential and urban residential, So I think when you start layering those on, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and say, well, it's inside the SBS stormwater. It's over 8,000, feet, and it's within one of these zones. There probably aren't going to be that many that qualify. So, and if it's, by the way, and if it's within that ASBS zone, Well, you'd still have the bluff setback issue. I started to say you might not have the bluff setback issue, but you would. You could potentially even add that as an issue or requirement.
Yeah, and I think, we do have to be careful about being overly restrictive.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's both, yeah, so I'm kind of stating that as both kind of a concern that maybe we are being overly restrictive if we layer all those things. And then also the flip side of that is, well, but they kind of make sense, right? So anyway, it's something to think about.
And I think if we had one more overlay, it might be the number of parcels that we determined in the water assessment that could accommodate an ADU. So if you put that over this map plus what you've just said, Cheryl, we may have our answer right in front of us.
Yeah, I think it gets to be a very small number, but again, there's some questions along the way in terms of what are we allowed to actually restrict. Maybe we're not allowed to restrict any of those things, right? So, or
Well,
very
but-
few.
You can restrict them to the extent that allowing them would impact coastal resources, which
Yes,
includes
yes.
water,
Right.
groundwater, wastewater, parking, visitor
Okay.
accommodations, all those kind of things. And yeah, I think it would be good to look at zoning, and I wouldn't propose using all these overlays. For the water assessment, what I did for that is I looked at all the parcels. It was somewhat arbitrary. I looked at all the parcels that met a minimum lot size, assuming that they would have to meet a minimum lot size for septic systems. And then I just took a quarter of those lots, which is generally, from what I've seen, 10% of properties would develop ADUs at the high end. And so a quarter of the properties that meet this minimum size is high. So that's probably an overestimate of the number of ADUs we could get. And what was that? I have that in my memo. I think it's 36. Maybe it was.
Yeah, that sounds right. I remember reading that and
and JADUs do not count towards that because you wouldn't expect them to use more water. So water, we basically have a set aside of enough water to accommodate 36 ADUs. So I don't think water is going to be our limiting factor. But I think bluff stability, septic, parking are potentially limiting factors.
one thing I did want to mention, by the way, before I forget, since we are talking about ADUs, is I did have a public comment that I received from John Graves on March 26, 2020. I won't read his whole letter, but basically what he's asking is that we consider language that would allow for tiny houses as we look at ADUs. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'll share this letter. It's in the public record. I believe Trevor received it as well, and Richard, so, and Diane before the others joined. So I'll make sure that's in the public record.
Oh, the older letter. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was, yeah, John sent this to us about tiny houses.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, so I'll just make sure I had it in my file, ADU file. So I didn't want to forget that. And tiny homes, I mean, they're, it's a great idea because sometimes they're modular. They can just be sort of rolled in and plugged in. And if they qualify, that could be a great way to add some additional housing for students or, elderly people, that kind of thing. All right. Anything else on that? I think we've covered it. So we are going to move on then to the commissioners' reports. Any reports from standing committees that you'd like to share? Commissioner Stockness.
So I pretty much shared during the STR, and then I'll have another report in July because our meeting's June 22. And basically the STR committee is going to look at the ordinance. They're not going to, give a lot of suggestions. They don't really know the ordinance that well. So I suggested they read it because of, COVID and the increase in tourists right now. Okay, so that's
Thank you,
it for
Diane.
me.
And thanks for signing up for that. Commissioner Hopkins?
Let's see, I see that on the Trinidad zoning, that special environment zone that you were talking about,
Mhm.
that's actually the Tesoro management plan area, from what I see, but it's not called that. And I see that the last council meeting, there's going to be some information or a management team put together, or there's a lot of discussion about it. And I think that the planning commission needs to be aware of these agreements from the past.
Yeah, you're right. We should be absolutely apprised of that. The Shirai management area, I believe, is the open space area there, the OS or open space.
It's,
Is it
there-
also the SE next to it? Because I know my property is right next to that, and that's SE.
well, so there's the Churai study area, which is in the existing general plan, and it includes some private property.
Ah, there we go.
And yeah, so that's not on this map. So there's a Churai study area, and like policy 69 that comes up a lot, that applies to the Churai study area that's zoned open space. So that's the dark green area just below where the lighthouse used to be. But then some of that lighter green area, the 3 parcels, and then going, so but then there's an area that's 12.5 acres that was granted to the city by the Coastal Conservancy. That's the subject of the Churai management plan. It is not the same as the Churai study area, even though they call it the Churai study area in the management plan, but that is not, they're not the same. The 12.5 acres is not the same as the Churai study area, which is why in the new general plan, I've started calling it the 12.5 acres, the Churai management area. And different standards apply in the OS versus the SE zone.
All right, thank you, Trevor, for the clarification. Does that make sense, Commissioner Hopkins? That I guess it's a little bit of a Venn diagram there.
I think I'm more confused now.
Yeah,
It's not a
it is
simple,
confusing.
no, it's not a simple issue.
From what I've seen, though, there's a lot of really huge amount of time in this agreement that has been put together, and it's really amazing. And there's signatures, and it's I mean, I'm just amazed to be a planning commissioner and just be learning about it, to be honest. So it looks legit. I mean, it was like signed by people that have become our DA and our past mayors and, people I knew, but I don't really know much more about, other than what I read, the legal reports from Gallegos law firm stating those facts, so I don't know, it's something for the planning commission, we should know about it, or we should be thinking about it a little bit, I think.
Yeah, we haven't been brought in to make any decisions. It hasn't been within our purview, but that doesn't mean we could add it as a future topic if you guys would like, and have someone come in, and I'm not sure who it would be. I'd need some guidance from Trevor and Eli, but perhaps we have someone come in and just give us an overview of what's going on and where it's at and what's involved. And I, could be relevant for proximity to some of these other property decisions we're making. So I don't know. So let's add that as a future topic. I think that's a great idea. Okay.
Sounds great. And I'm looking at it, I'm talking to him however I could help.
Okay. Awesome. If you, yeah,
So let's
Commissioner
get-
Hopkins, if you have somebody in mind that you think would be good, maybe you, if you don't mind, maybe work with Trevor and you guys come up with somebody that could come and speak with us. That'd be great. If you don't mind
Sure.
taking that on. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
So Trevor,
Stockness.
can we get that zoning map?
What that Tom just showed?
Right.
It's on the website, but we do have actually more. The one in the general, well, that's the current zoning map, and that is on the website, but it doesn't show the Churai study area. But that would be on the existing plate 1 in the general plan, also on the city's website. The current general plan land use element that shows land use designation shows the Churai management area, I believe, the 12.5 acres.
So maybe Angela could run that off for our next packet. Because
I
I
would-
think that's good. We could use it for ADUs too, because we'd have all the zones right in front of us.
I looked at the map in the management plan, in the plan that was agreed upon. It's
Yeah,
there's a-
that's the 12.5 acres.
okay. So that's the wrong, but that's still kind of interesting land too. That was purchased by the conservatory.
It was
And
purchased
then-
by the Coastal Conservancy, yes, and given to the city for the purposes of public access, natural resources, and cultural resource protection.
And for us to manage as city planning, right?
Yes, yes.
So it's all very pertinent to what we're discussing.
Well, with one caveat, when you say management by the city, it is a team that is responsible for the management, not the city alone. The city is just one signatory to the management plan.
Yes, good
Well,
point.
it's owned by the city. The intent was to transfer it to the Yurok tribe. That has met with a variety of hurdles. I mean, the whole thing has just been a mess. It is not clean and straightforward by any means. The plan was developed with very little public input, no staff input. And when the city adopted it, they made it very clear they were only adopting it because it was not binding. I have looked at it to incorporate it into the general plan, and it's very vague. It's kind of a plan for a plan. But there is a lot of good information in there, and a lot of good policies. And I have been looking at that for incorporating some of those things into the general plan update.
Yeah, so maybe that's where we want to bucket it. And just for point of order, I don't want to spend too much time on this more time. And it's not because it's not fascinating. It is. But we are getting dangerously close to covering it as an agenda item, and it was not agendized. So, but let me take one question from Councilman Kloppus.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that I volunteered as a member to represent Trinidad on the mediation board. So there will be mediation this year, and
Oh,
I
excellent.
was lucky enough to get accepted as a member. So hopefully, whatever the issues are, we can try to settle them and get this thing beyond us. That's one of the top items on my list to accomplish as a councilman. But thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you for that update. And Commissioner Hopkins, thanks for raising this. I think it's something of interest. And I'd like to put it as a future agenda item, perhaps in the context of general plan. We'll have to, you guys can discuss it and loop me in as needed. And did you want to add something? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I'm open to looking more at it, and please, Trevor, I'd love to clarify whatever, but just by the nature of an agreement with all the signatures that I see of our city leaders, of everybody, an agreement is not a plan to make a plan. An agreement is an agreement.
evidently there's some discussion. So even when an agreement is in place, occasionally parties don't always agree on what was agreed to. And, I think that's where the mediation is coming in, if I understand correctly, right?
Sounds good. Okay. We'll get to
Well, I hope so, yeah. Commissioner Heikkinen?
Unrelated to that, but it was brought up during this discussion. Who would be the right person to reach out to get, there've been a few packets, Trevor, that have had the 11 by 17, the larger format maps. I'm a real paper guy. I just don't do well electronic. Is there like a set of kind of standard maps that would be really good reference material for us to have as planning commissioners, so we can just kind of constantly go through them? And as they get updated that way, just, I don't know, a map book or something, who would be the right person to go to, and what would be the right maps that we should all have as a common starting point?
That's a good question. I mean, I can, the city does not have a color printer in town hall. I think there's one like in the police department, but I don't know if it can do 11 by 17. But I would be happy to print whatever maps you want. I mean, a good starting point would be the most recent general plan maps. And then it would also be good to have some maps of the current, probably general plan and zoning, as a reference to what we've got now versus what we're heading towards. But certainly a lot of the older maps just don't have a lot of detail in them.
Sure, yeah.
So it's
Is
nice
that
to
manageable
have-
ahead of the next meeting, you think?
Yeah.
Okay. I know that would help me tremendously.
So I'll print out the current general plan maps, as well as the existing land use and zoning maps. If anybody thinks of anything else they want, let me know. Some of you probably already have those maps, because we've been looking at the general plan more recently. So probably Cheryl, Richard, and Diane, you probably don't need those. But Aaron and Tom might not have them all.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I think Diane and Richard, unless you want them, I think I have them from the prior packets, but just let Trevor, maybe you can just reach out and let Trevor know. Otherwise, she'll just do them for Tom and Aaron. All right, I want to move on in the interest of time to the staff report. And then we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, what I have to add, I did finish my first draft of the water ordinance. So I'm going to be reaching out to Eli and maybe Richard as well on figuring out the next steps for that ordinance. And probably a final review of the water shortage contingency plan with that. So I think that's important. Otherwise, I've been plugging away on, the SB2 stuff. We've still got some pending applications. I expect them to be coming back at any time. So June, I expect permits again, but they keep getting delayed. The general plan, I haven't had time to work on that with everything else, but I'm trying to get in our priorities as I can.
All right, thank you. All right, I think we've had a full agenda, good discussion. Unless there's anything else burning, I don't see any hands raised, then we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank you,
good
Trevor.
evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.